Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I see that we have only virtual presentation. So may I ask you who is the chair of this session?
The chair is the Professor Giovanna Campa, but is waiting for to be admitted in the room into the room.
But how is that? I do not have to admit her. She should just enter the room.
I'm trying to send her the link because maybe
Okay.
I'm doing the
Thank
wrong
you.
procedure.
Good
Okay.
morning.
Good morning to you all.
Okay, good morning.
Are we all inside? Or...
Well, I see that Alessio Pino is here.
Yeah.
Professor Acampa is here as well, and Mariolina Grasso is here. So maybe whenever you want, you can start the session. Thank you very much for your participation, and let's enjoy this session.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that is we missed um, the first presentation. Alessio, do you know something about?
Yeah, actually now I'm about to write to them. At most we can just delay
Start
it
from the
and we can
second one.
start with the second one.
Yeah. Tell me what I have to do. If you can contact them.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I'm writing to them right now. So
Yeah.
I will see whether they are arriving now or maybe we need to delay that presentation and start with the second one.
Okay.
Just the last thing before starting the session, Professor Acampa, I have to remind you to fill the evaluation form for the
Yes, I
papers.
saw. Yes.
You had already received the link?
Yes, I saw that in my area. I saw the evaluation.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So
Thank you very
can I
much.
start?
Yes.
Can I start or I have to wait? I think.
I think it's better if we start because it's already a little bit
Okay.
like 10 minutes
So
past
good
the start
morning
time.
to everyone and welcome to our session on flu management in urban context. I'm Giovanna Campa and I'll be your chair. So we have an interesting lineup of presentations today, each offering unique perspectives on flow of information, people, and resources shape our urban environment. So Alessio Pino will present a place-based multi-sectoral project for definition of indicators and thresholds to support sustainable mobility policies in Italian cities, which focuses on innovative approaches to urban transition towards carbon neutrality. I think that each presentation will be 10 minutes so that we have some minutes for questions to speak together and give a contribute to a stimulating discussion. So Alessio, you can start with your presentation.
Okay, perfect. Okay, can you see that in full screen?
Yes, it's very. Yes, I can see it.
Okay,
You
full
can
screen or
see in presentation modality if you want, because it's not in presentation
okay,
modality.
that was my question. Okay, just
Okay.
1 second. Okay. Yeah. Okay, now it should be fine, right?
Yes, fine. That's fine.
Okay, so good morning to everyone. I'm Alessio Pino from the University of Enna Core, where I'm a PhD student. And the work that I'm going to present today is part of a joint project with three more Italian universities that is part of a national project, of a project of national interest, which has been carried out for the past 1 year together with the University of Florence, the Polytechnic School of Turin, and the University of Naples, which is called Urget Vademecum. And the co-authors of the paper that I'm presenting today are also two members of the project from the University of Florence. And the object of this project is basically a framework for the shift to sustainable mobility in Italian cities, to be extended to foreign contexts as well, based on three main methodologies which are integrated within this framework. So cluster analysis, threshold theory, and the multi-criteria decision analysis. This is the widest framework of this project, but now we're going to focus on it in detail. Specifically, what is the idea behind this project? First, it is to devise custom actions based on the analysis of the urban context and the definition of properties based on on its characteristics in relation to the aspects of mobility. So in the first phase, the urban context will be characterized, then these properties are defined, and finally, possible actions based on the outcome on the result of these properties are decided. Finally, these methodologies is tested on four sites in Italy, that is Turin, Siena, a conglomeration of cities, which involves Orta di Atella in Campania, and Catania. But what is actually characteristic of this project is the nature of the analysis, because the idea is to put together three lenses to unveil different and complementary aspects of the urban center in relation to mobility. So in particular, the urban analysis is carried out in three different dimensions that are urban morphology, socioeconomic aspects, and finally transport related aspects. So, how does this blend together, and what are we going to present today? So, basically, today we will present uh, all the indicators and all the modes of analysis that pertain to urban morphology. In particular, what has been defined for urban morphology, and what the concept behind urban morphology is that the intrinsic characteristics of the city uh, make by themselves a propensity to given modality of mobilities. So, based on urban planning related features, so in detail, resident population, impermeability, the composition of services, the size of historic centers, and the relationship between built and non-built area, as well as the degree of information technology for the city and the typology of roads which are present within the city. Several parameters have been devised to understand how much each city has a propensity to various types of mobility. So, while the ones on the left are the row parameters that have been used, these have been employed to construct the parameters and indicators that can be seen on the right. So basically, how much of the city is waterproofed, what is the density of population, which public utility services are present, where the historical center is delimited, and so on. So these are some of the analysis that we have carried out for each of the cities that are part of the project as test sites. A spatial analysis has been carried out. So first, to characterize the part of the city that are impaired, that are waterproofed or not waterproofed. Then the resident population has been projected by built areas by considering the average the population divided by the surface, and then polarized according to the density of buildings, resulting in different values of density, as it can be seen from the most intensive sites to sites with a lower population. Then, for historical centers, in a quite innovative process, the data from the Observatory of the Real Estate Market have been used from the Revenue Agency, because while in the practice of urban planning, there was no exact delimitation of the urban center, of the historical center rather, since it is present in some urban plans, but it is not a fixed rule. Actually, the data from the observatory turned out to be more useful because each zone in the subdivision from the OMI is characterized as being part or non-part of the historic center. Regarding urbanized areas, the ratio between buildings and the surface occupied by roads was used, pertaining to different getting to areas with a different degree of roads and other urbanization minimum characteristics. Finally, the urban radius was calculated by considering the time that is needed to move from a given point of the urban center to outer areas. So in this way, so this was projecting on the surrounding context for all the four cities. And finally, a characteristic which is particularly useful for several modes of mobility, the slope of the road network was evaluated by considering all the acclivity that is present in each line of the road graph, leading to different levels of slope throughout the urban centers. Regarding the urban fabrics, three main types were used. So that is compact monocentric, non-compact monocentric, and polycentric. And this was useful to evaluate whether there is a prevalence of narrow buildings and narrow spaces between buildings, or if they are not. Of course, since most of these cities have an historical center, there is actually quite a marked difference between the historical center and the surrounding areas, which corresponds to the fabrics from the urban planning practice. This led to evaluate a high number of parameters concerning the settlement typology, the resident population, and the urban radius, which are here presented in the initial language, but here are synthesized into all the characteristics that turn out to be more useful for the evaluation of the urban context. So in particular, you can see that the cities have different degrees of these parameters, but the relationship between these parameters returns the different values for the three mobility properties that we have investigated. So walkability, bikeability, and micromobility. Here, there is a more marked difference compared to the starting properties, because it is quite evident that cities with lower dimensions, such as Orta di Atella, have higher values for these three parameters compared to cities with a higher surface, which is distributed in a wider area. So, what does this tell us? First, the general conclusion is that each city, in its intrinsic form, has propensities to different modes of mobility. And this results into the need for more custom design policies for each of these cities. For example, in this case, of course, this is one of the starting points of this experimentation of this project, which is still ongoing and will find completion in the next months. For example, in this case, while, as we are already pointed out, a small center like Orta di Atella has already high scores, and so the dimension on which it has to be turned in a city which supports mobility policies has to be through social aspects. In the other cities, it is evident that more efforts are required to solve structural issues. Okay, thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Alessio. And so I have one question for you. And was the propensity to use a car also assessed? And how does it fit into the methodology?
Okay, well, actually, to frame the car and the propensity to car, I have to explain better what is the scope. So basically, since it is about a mobility shift, so it is about turning the modal share where the car is more present into a modal share where the car is less present. So actually, propensity to car, rather than be seen as a structural characteristics to be valorized, is actually something that something whose social propensity to be reduced was evaluated. So while these characteristics are more related to the form of the city, since now the car is widely used in all the cities that were analyzed, what was evaluated is in each city how much car can be reduced. So, for example, related to other parameters, which are the level of education or the income, which were not presented in this phase.
Okay. Are there other questions? Okay, so we can go on now. And I'm wondering if Alfonso Annunziata
No,
Yeah.
he's the technical assistant.
is the technical assistant, and so so we can go on our second presentation that is
Yeah.
titled "A Co-Design and Co-Evaluation Model for the Reconversion of Dismissed Railway to Greenways, the case of Mr. Bianco." Will be presented by Mariolina Grasso. Mariolina Grasso.
I'm here.
The presentation will share insights on how community engagement and a social multi-criteria evaluation framework can be used to optimize railway to greenway conversions.
Okay, sorry, I had a problem with sharing my screen. It happened also the last session. So I asked if Alessio could share the presentation for
Okay,
me.
yeah.
It gives me, it appears me a mistake. It doesn't allow me to share my screen. It happens again. I don't know why. So I'm sorry, Alessio, but I have to.
Yeah, okay, I will follow you with the slides. Okay. Okay, can you see it?
Okay, perfect. I can see. Everybody can see the presentation?
Yes, yes.
Yes, yes.
So I'm starting. So good morning, everyone. My name is Mariolina Grasso from University of Ennacore. And together with Professor Giovanna Campa and Alessio Pino, we present today a case study on co-design and co-evaluation model for transforming disused railway infrastructure into sustainable greenways, focusing on the town of Mr. Bianco in Sicily. So, Alessio, please, the next slide. In Italy, we have over than 1,500 kilometers of railway infrastructure that are currently disused, and the ownership is split between Ferrovie dello Stato and Rete Ferroviaria Italiana, RFI. And these abandoned tracks represent both challenges and an opportunity for territorial regeneration, of course. And by the analysis of the literature in the file, Alessio, please, the next one. Thank you. The use of this infrastructure has generally taken three main paths, as you can see: the conversion into traffic facilities, the development of tourism and commerce zones, or transformation into public spaces. Among these, of course, greenways are emerging as particularly promising. So about the transformation scenarios, greenways, what are greenways? Of course, they represent an innovative and sustainable solution. They convert all rail lines into linear park and non-motorized transport corridors. And this helped to regenerate, local economies, support sustainable mobility, and promote social interaction, and at the same time, the ecological restoration. So about the research team, the next slide, Alessio, thank you. Okay, you can see that our research explore the social regeneration, of linear infrastructure. Then we also focus on the comprehension of the social needs of the population, of the local population, of such projects. And another field of our research team is the impact of this interaction with a wide community. So trying to analyze and comprehend how this impact. So the structure of our work center on the regeneration hypothesis of the dismissed Circumetnea railway. We will talk about the Circumetnea in the next slide. And in Sicily, we engaged the Mr. Bianco community in defining and ranking greenways alternatives using a peculiar method, which is the social multi-criteria evaluation method. Social multi-criteria evaluation is a participatory method developed in the late 1990s, and it goes beyond the traditional cost-benefit analysis. So this is the the difference by integrating social, ethical, and participatory dimension. And also it allows for a robust and democratic decision-making process. For example, accommodating multiple perspectives and criteria. As you can see, it's characterized by 4 main steps. So we start with the problem definition, then we go to the structure of the problem, the evaluation phase, and of course the analysis with the ranking of the alternatives. Before starting about our methodology, so go inside the core of the research, we make a quick overview of the case study. As I mentioned before, the case study is the Circumetnea Railway, which was built in the late 18th. Once played a vital role in connecting all the communities around Mount Etna. And Mr. Bianco, which is a country just 6 kilometers from Catania, has grown into a strategic hub. And the recent closure of part of the Circumetnea, fundamentally due to the expansion of the subway metro, sparked debates on how the repurpose of these on how to repurpose these infrastructures, these peculiar infrastructures. So now I will focus on our methodology, which included the following main step, as you can see from the image. Institutional analysis was, of course, the first step. Then we tried to identify the stakeholders and the community focus group. And then we go to the definition of the design goal and co-design workshop to develop solution and the co-evaluation session to assess them. And finally, at the end of our methodology, of course, we had the public presentation of the result obtained. So starting with the stakeholder analysis, it took from January and we had in February, so it lasted at least more or less 2 months. And we conducted a detailed stakeholder mapping in January 2024. Each included over 120 entities among volunteering, association, businesses, religious group, and media networks. And of course, this allowed us to grasp the community fabric and its different needs. Also, after defining the stakeholders, we created the focus group and we spent 2 months from January to February. And of course, the focus group were divided by age. As you can see, we go from 18s to over 60s and 60. And then we had the connection to the area if they were resident or worker or business owner. And of course, we define also the institutional affiliation. About the focus group, we held the focus group to define the scope, of course. And from the insight of this focus group, we discovered that residents would benefit from improved daily commuting option. It was the first that was defined. Then the accessible green areas, it was another topic. And then another one, it was the better connectivity to nearby Catania. It was very important to the inhabitants of Mr. Bianco to go to Catania for different various purposes, okay? And so as the science scope, it was defined, as I mentioned before, 2 areas, Mr. Bianco and Piano Tavola, and Mr. Bianco and Nesima. So we focused on these two main routes. And of course, these are highly relevant for both commuting and leisure. So let's see, please, the next one slide.
Yeah.
So, sorry?
Yeah, it's there.
Thank you. So the first concept, as I mentioned before, it was of co-design. It was the commuter greenway, optimized for speed and efficiency. So it was the main scope. It featured a dedicated asphalt bike lane and separate pedestrian paths. And it is also supported by lighting and bike parking. So these are the characteristics. And it's designed to facilitate smooth daily movement between key zones. So this is the first one. Then we have another co-design, and the second proposal was the urban nature greenway, a response to the need of the local natural areas. It offers shaded trails, native vegetation, and so on. And it also supports biodiversity and climate resilience. Of course, this concept of design process, and I'm talking of all the design, the co-design proposal, were elaborated, of course, by the participant and developed with researcher support and co-design workshop. This is just a note. Okay. So the next one, the third one and the most integrated option is the community mobility greenway. It blends efficiency mobility with social activation, and it includes bike lanes, plazas, public art, and so on. And of course, the main characteristics, the social interaction and cultural expression. So, during the month of May 2024, we conducted the co-evaluation phase. The criteria included and considered were, as you can see, accessibility and connectivity, safety and security, environmental sustainability, social and recreational value, economic impact, and maintenance feasibility. And we use second method to analyze the stakeholder preferences, okay? So as you can see, all the criteria were weighted by the stakeholder, And then we go on with the construction of the concordance matrix and the discordance matrix. Okay, so we were able to obtain a ranking based on the criteria of all the the option considered. So the community, the evaluation result actually, the community mobility greenway ranked the highest, as you can see, balance, and this means balance all key aspects. The commuter greenway followed, strong in efficiency but weaker in social and environmental value. Then the last one, the urban nature greenway, scored well ecologically, but lacked in transport benefits. Ultimately, mobility and social cohesion were the community top's priority. So, skip to the conclusion. We understand that revitalizing a dismissed railway is deeply a social project. Okay, it's not just about converting infrastructure; it's about shaping places that reflect the real everyday needs of community. Each design solution serves different purpose, depending on its emphasis on transport, environmental, or social engagement. And another, to the next slide, please, Alessio. Another conclusion we are were writing was that this case study demonstrates that combining social multi-criteria evaluation with participatory co-design is effective in tailoring greenways planning to real local needs. It's reveal how different values and goals can be balanced, leading to adaptive, sustainable and inclusive urban regeneration strategy. So thank you for the attention.
Professor, you have to unmute your microphone.
Thank you, Mariolina. A question for you. And why was selector second chosen as a multi-criteria method within social multi-criteria evaluation?
So because it allows measuring, not only the global preferences, but also the relationship between single group preferences in terms of accordance and discordance. And also it's enabled to understand the preference solution derives from the degree of agreement. So this is fundamentally was the reason why we choose the electoral second method.
Okay, thank you. And Alessio, do you have any news about the other group? Are they?
I got no response actually. I'm starting to think that one hypothesis is that they did not calculate the local time in a correct way. So I hope I maybe I suppose. Okay. Just now I got a response. Okay.
So that we define what we have to do.
No. Okay. No. They had a problem. Okay. We will go on. Okay.
So we have another, finally, Alessio, you will conclude our session with evaluation of the impact of tourism flows on the urban food service industry, a sensitivity analysis on the city of Rome, which looks at the impact of tourism on food service in Rome. Are you ready with the presentation? Can you?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so here I am again. And this time it's a different work, which was carried out again with Professor Acampa and with Alberto Pino from the University of Rome, La Sapienza. And in this case, the idea was to look at an issue that is affecting Italy and the main Italian cities in this moment, which is over tourism, and interpret it in a different urban perspective, that is the perspective of urban resilience. In particular, the question was, considering that the level of tourism is even going beyond the pre-pandemic levels, how does this comply with the way in which urban spaces and urban structures change? So, in other words, how in a city where over tourism and tourism variability reaches high values and its trend continues to anticipate exponential growth, how does this affect the urban form and urban services? And so, how can the structure of the city adapt to these changing trends and be subject to these changing trends? So, in other words, functional imbalance. The case that we analyzed was in particular Rome. Why Rome? Because in both the perspectives, in both the dimensions that are related to tourism. So, on the one end, the food service industry, and in other end, the high variation, the real estate market, due to the high increase in the number of short-term hospitality services. So, in other words, bed and breakfast. How it is a city that presents the highest manifestation of both these characteristics. So where over tourism shapes in a significant way the city. Since now the tourist presence has exceeded even 16 million, what we want to evaluate is the dependency of the food service industry on tourist flows. This was carried out in 4 phases. So first, a quantitative survey of restaurant typologies was carried out. Then a financial and break-even analysis was conducted for each typology. Finally, a sensitivity analysis was conducted by simulating different scenarios in the drop of tourist demand to see how the city changes depending on the varying variable conditions. And finally, how this led to special vulnerability, which is our final goal. So I want to stress again that what we want to see is how flows in the city can be changed by, special flows in the cities can be changed by social flows, socioeconomic flows. So that is in this case, tourism. So how even characteristics that we attribute to urban morphology, for example, the functional mix, what we call mixité, changes based on how flows of a totally different nature and characteristics of a totally different nature vary. So the tools that we are using to conduct this evaluation are break-even analysis, where considering the variation of revenue of total costs and of fixed cost, what is evaluated is the break-even point where the revenue goes beyond total costs. So that is the point after which or there is profitability for a given business activity, or below which there is no profitability, and so the business activity is at risk. Regarding the sensitivity analysis, this is indeed a different thing. So that is the evaluation of how a given variable changes according to the variation of other variables. So in other words, since in this way the non-dependent variable was the tourism flows, what we wanted to see is how this variable of tourism flows affect the variable of restaurant openings. So to understand this, actually a bit more insight has to be made into the urban structure of Rome, which is constituted by a high number of different areas with different characteristics. It is split into 15 areas called municipios, each of which has a different characterization and a different number and different composition between tourists and residents. In particular, of course, areas such as the first municipio has a high presence of tourists, while more peripheral municipios, for example, those from 10 to 15, have a much less consistent presence of tourists. The next step was to define, making use of the existing literature, but also adding a new systematization of this concept. That is to distinguish the restaurants according to four main typologies. So that is fine dining, trattorias, fast casual, and street food. This was probably the most time-consuming part of this work, since it involved making use of crowd mapping works, then drawing the values from the Google Maps API, which allow um, automated mapping of given entries and instances on a map. And then these data were also cross-checked with institutional data concerning the business activities for various categories provided by the FIPE and the Chamber of Commerce. So as you can see, also the number of restaurants is particularly different throughout the various municipios, and also the composition of these restaurants, as they meet different types of audience. Based on these typologies, which are different in terms of price per meal and fixed costs, since the quality of the service is different, but also, of course, the fixed cost represented by the rent, so which derives from the real estate market and its local characteristics, are pretty different. So based on the data from revenues that were calculated through financial analysis, based on the fixed costs that were obtained by considering the standard characteristics of the restaurant sector provided by the two main providers of the Food Industry Association and NPS, which provides data on the contracts related to the food industry sector. Then rent costs were evaluated through OMI, as already established. Finally, the break-even point was calculated through break-even analysis in terms of meals per year that have to be provided in order to have a minimum margin to not make the business activity at risk. So after calculating this value, the main point to evaluate the number of restaurant closures in the various scenarios was the drops from the number of meals that are required to go beyond the break-even point, and the resulting drop that will be associated with the loss in tourists, which only affects a single part of the audience of the restaurants, while of course the municipios, which are characterized by a lower presence of tourists, are less affected by these changes. So by developing these calculations, it was possible to obtain the drops in two scenarios, into hypothesized scenarios, that is, the scenario with a drop at 5% and the scenario with a drop at 10% for each of the municipios and in total. This allowed to calculate the vulnerability that is associated with these new two states, and which can be projected to the present date, which shows that for the municipios, for municipio 1, vulnerability is, in the first scenario, even reaching 3.2% due to the high number of restaurants and due to the high number of tourists, so which would completely change the morphology of the audience which visits this restaurant, which reaches even 6.5%, with just a variation of 10% in the tourism values. So which shows that there is a high degree of dependency. So as a conclusion, the point of this work was to show that even though the presence of a high tourism share leads to a significant economic positivity and economic benefit for a city, in the moment when a city relies excessively on tourism, so that is, the number of restaurant activities are extremely over-dimensioned for local residents, as they have to mainly fulfill the needs of tourists whose composition is of course variable, then their trend can be affected by several external variables. There can be non-resilient consequences on the urban fabric, which would have a frequent turnover and would have significant problems of closures with services. So in this case, a more deep reflection has to be carried out regarding how the city of Rome and its essential services are actually resilient toward these external factors. In the end, one more factor that emerged is how the composition of the city of Rome is variable from this point of view, as areas with a higher tourist presence are extremely subject and vulnerable to variations, while peripheral areas, even though their economy is less prosperous, they are actually more stable toward this type of changes. Thank you for your kind attention. Professor, you have to unmute you, I think. Okay.
A couple of questions, Alessio, for you. The first is were the spending trends of residents considered constant in the simulated scenario or not?
Okay, this is a relevant question because actually it goes into one of the main themes of the work. So that is when I mentioned resilience and special resilience, this is actually also connected to a sort of social resilience, because the trend of residence expense in relation to tourism flows is actually a quite complex theme, because we have at least two contrasting trends. On the one hand, we have that the GDP related to tourism, of course, has a quite relevant impact on Rome's overall economy. So, of course, a reduction in the GDP related to tourism would also lead to probably a reduction in the possibility to spend by the population. So, on the one hand, there will be a spending reduction, which would also increase even more this vulnerability. But there is also another aspect. So that is the high restaurant closure is associated with a high turnover in the restaurants. So in the literature, we found that a high turnover in restaurants also tends to increase the number of visits to restaurants by residents, because there is always a novelty in the demand. So in the supply, sorry. So basically, there are these two contrasting aspects which would have to be evaluated separately, as they are a quite complex thing, but they show how even this variable can entangle so many variations in the social fabric as well.
Another question for you. What could be the next research development?
Well, maybe one development could be the one that we have just mentioned. So that is not just the spatial resilience, but also the social resilience. So what happens when in a city, so starting from this theme of the further analysis of over tourism, what happens in a city in the inhabitants' perspective when tourism changes so much? How do social conditions change? If there are spillover effects or cascade-like effects on the economy and in the type of business activities that will open. It is, well, on the one hand, it is true that food service industry would have a drop, but what happens on other activities? Which type of activities are more prone and more tendent to be opened if there is a tourism drop? And so there is a higher need to focus on residents and their needs. This could be one development.
And do you think could be interesting a comparison between another touristic center, like, for example, Florence or Venice, and make a comparison?
Well, Venice is quite a hot topic in these days for obvious reasons. So yeah, probably I think that results in Venice and Florence, which have a a lower dimension, and so probably effects would have even a more immediate spillover, would be interesting. So in this sense, like evaluating over tourism not just in terms of the raw number of tourists, but in the value of vulnerability will be a good key for comparison.
Yeah, I think it could be the next work, our work. Okay, so we finish because no, we have not other presentation, and so Alfonso, I think that our session is finished. I'm gonna evaluate the presentation.
Thank you. Could you also not sign, but also take a note of the no-show,
Yeah, yes,
okay, in the evaluation form also,
yeah, yeah.
why that one presenter wasn't
Was
able to
yes, of
present their
course. Okay.
work. So thank
Okay,
you very much.
I'm
It
gonna
was
write it. I couldn't see deep in a deep way the sheet in which there are all the questions, but I think that I have the space in which I can write that he was not present to the
I
session.
think so because
Oth-
I haven't seen the evaluation form, so
no.
I don't know. Otherwise,
Otherwise, I'm gonna communicate it to Beniamino Gervasi or
The
to
session
Carla Galà.
I was chair, there was the same problem. One author
Was not present.
did not show, and they told me I had to put 0 on all the, and then
Okay.
notes the fact that was not present.
Okay. 0 to all the evaluation. Okay. Thank
thank you
you.
very much.
Thank
Congratulations on your presentations. Very interesting work, and thank you for your contribution to this conference.
Thank you. Thank you,
Okay, thanks to
Alfonso.
you
Have a
guys.
good day.
Thank you. You too.
Okay, goodbye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.